Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We are about to start the third webinar from PPMA. And to start the session, I request Tawqirul Haq Saab, President, Chairman PPMA, to give opening remarks.
Assalamu alaikum and welcome to all the participants. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Zaheer-Ud-Din Babar, who has spared his time for this important webinar. And I'm thankful to Professor Dr. Izhar Hussain also from Dow University of Health Sciences. And thankful to Farmivo and Mr. Harun Qasim once again for arranging such an informative session. Today's session is very important regarding the pricing policy of for vaccines. As you know that this year was a very special year for the world, and the entire world faced tough time due to COVID, and we are still uncertain when this phase will be over. And as you know that this pandemic is not yet off, and the need of the hour is that besides caring about this virus and praying to God that we should be safe from this, another need of the hour is to have vaccines as early as possible. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, we are still uncertain when vaccines will be available to take care of this deadly disease. While we are seeing that in the world, they have started vaccinating patients suffering from COVID. And in Pakistan, we pray that maybe by the end of this quarter, we'll be able to find some vaccines here. So the main point is that for vaccines, I think there are 3 points important. First of all, its availability, then access to the masses, and the most important part is the pricing of vaccines, because unfortunately, we don't have insurance system overall for the masses in Pakistan. This is non-reimbursed market. So if the vaccine is available, the main issue would be how we'll be able to vaccinate all the population. So I think the pricing of vaccine is imperative to consider. And that is why today this session is for pricing policy for vaccines. As far as pharmaceutical industry is concerned, right from the start of this unprecedented situation, we all noticed that our PPMA and the entire pharmaceutical industry took initiative to make sure the access to the medicine. And despite all the challenges, when our people were also getting affected with this virus, the industry made sure that medicines are available round the clock. Not only this, the pharmaceutical industry took initiative to make sure that anything related to cure of this disease is available. Like you saw that very rapidly we were able to make available masks and sanitizers, and we also run lots of campaign for testing. And pharmaceutical industry was one step ahead in providing free medicines to corona centers as well. We worked very closely with the government, and we also provided PPEs and also we disinfecting campaign for the medical community as well. So we are all set, and if the vaccines are available, we will always be available with the government to make access to these vaccines throughout Pakistan, because pharmaceutical industry has a very wide range of distributors with them who can make these vaccines available at all part of Pakistan. So I would not take much time. And once again, thank you very much, Professor Zaheer-Ud-Din Babar, for you will be imparting very critical information which is coming ahead regarding the availability of vaccine and the pricing policy. So thank you very much. And once again, thanks to all participants who have joined us for this webinar.
Thank you, Tawqirul Saab. Thank you very much. I think PPMA is the organization which provide about 95% of the drugs Otherwise, we would have been importing drugs at a higher cost. That is one of the very important contribution PPMA is making to the citizens of Pakistan. Uh, Let me start the introduction of Professor Zaheer-Ud-Din Babar, although Professor Zaheer-Ud-Din Babar needs no introduction, but formally I have to do it. Professor Zaheer-Ud-Din Babar is professor in medicine and healthcare and director of Center of Pharmaceutical Policy and Practice Research at University of Huddersfield, United Kingdom. A pharmacist by training, Professor Babar is a recipient of prestigious Research Excellence Award from University of Auckland. He understands the health systems and pharmacy globally and known for his work in pharmaceutical policy and practice, including quality use of medicine, access to medicine, medicine prices, issues related to pharmacoeconomics. He has published in high impact journals such as Lancet and has acted as a consultant for WHO, World Pharmaceutical Society, Health Action International, International Union Against Tuberculosis and Lung Diseases, World Bank, International Pharmaceutical Federation, and for Pharmaceutical Management Agency of New Zealand. He edited work including economic evaluation of pharmacy services, pharmaceutical pricing in 21st century, pharmaceutical prices in countries with developing healthcare systems, global pharmaceutical policy, equitable access to high-cost medicine, pharmacy practice research and methods, social administrative aspects of pharmacy in low and middle income countries, and the Encyclopedia of Pharmacy Practice Clinical Pharmacy 2019. The book, uh, the books are used in curriculum design, policy development, and referrals all around the world. Professor Babar is conducted globally, has delivered invited lectures, and has spoken conferences and meetings in Austria, Australia, Bangladesh, China, Denmark, Georgia, Egypt, Indonesia, Malaysia, Netherlands, New Zealand, Pakistan, Qatar, Sri Lanka, Thailand, United Kingdom, and United States. Professor Babar is editor-in-chief of BMC, Journal of Pharmaceutical Policy and Practice, and can be contacted as z.barber at hud.ac.uk. So over to Babar Saab, Professor Babar.
Assalamu alaikum, and thank you so much, Zaheer Saab, Chairman, Pakistan Pharmaceutical Manufacturer Association, Dr. Izhar Saab for a very kind introduction, and also to our friend, Dr. Zaheer-Ud-Din Saab, who is on the stage as well. So thank you so much for inviting me to actually talk about on this very important topic, friends and colleagues, which is on vaccine, basically on access to vaccine and vaccine prices. So I'm happy to share my thoughts. So what I'm going to do is the next 20 to 25 minutes, I'm just going to give a sort of a general introduction on the access to vaccine and vaccine. Access to vaccine and vaccine prices, and then perhaps I'm going to share my thoughts on the COVID-19 vaccine prices as well. So I'm going to share my slides with you. Can you enable my screen sharing, because it's not allowing me to share my screen? Yeah, I can do this now. Thank you. Okay. So as I said, I'm going to talk about in the next 15, 20 minutes, 25 minutes to get an understanding on prices of vaccines and to explore factors which could affect the prices of COVID-19 vaccines as well. So vaccines, as you know, that they're really crucial to alleviate the human suffering. The WHO has estimated that vaccines save millions of lives each year. UNICEF, who is the major provider, which is a United Nations agency for children, is actually provide 40% of the vaccines through Gavi, which is a global alliance for vaccine initiative, which is funded by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There is a lot of improvement in vaccination coverage in the last years or so, and the expanded program on immunization was established in 1974 and has proved to be an important initiative. And as a result, the immunization coverage has increased from up to 95%. So there's been a lot of improvement in terms of vaccines and so on and so forth. There are various organizations which are involved in the vaccine coverage, and especially in low and middle income countries, and more so in the low income countries. And these organizations are Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Global Alliance for Vaccine Initiative, which is a very popular, is called Gavi Alliance, which actually sort of procure millions of doses from pharmaceutical companies and actually provide it either free of cost or through some charges to developing countries. WHO, United States National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, as well as United Nations Children Fund, UNICEF, which provides about 40% of the vaccines in these countries. It's also very interesting to know that pharmaceutical market, the pharmaceutical companies and vaccines market, about 80% of the vaccines are produced by five big manufacturers, by five big pharmaceutical companies. And these are GlaxoSmithKline, Merck, Novartis, Pfizer, and Sanofi. So these five companies actually sort of constitute 80% of the share. They actually control 80% of the market, and they produce majority in bulk. So there is a kind of a dominance in this field of these pharmaceutical companies because they produce these biotech and high-tech vaccines. In low and middle income countries, the vaccines are heavily subsidized. So these are either subsidized by the governments or these are subsidized by the organizations which I've listed earlier on, whether these are Gavi Alliance or Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or WHO or UNICEF. But there's always a question that which stakeholder in low and middle income countries is basically responsible to keep the prices low, whether it's vaccine manufacturers, NGOs, private foundations, or combinations of the above. So to do that, we need to understand the global procurement of vaccines, basically. So the global procurement of vaccines more or less could be divided into these five sort of, segments. So there are countries which actually procure majority of their vaccines through UNICEF. They're eligible for Gavi support. So it means that Global Alliance for Vaccine Initiative would not only would fund those procurements. So they would be actually procured through UNICEF tender mechanisms, but they would get money and support from Gavi. Then there are middle income countries which use Gavi, which use UNICEF actually to procure, because the UNICEF has a sort of a procurement database, or they have procurement procedures which are very effective or cost effective, but they do not get financial support from Gavi. So they use UNICEF process and mechanism, but they don't get money or support from Gavi to procure those vaccines. Then there are countries in the Pan American Health Organization region, which actually procure these through PAHO revolving fund. And these are the countries which are mostly in Latin or South America, the countries of Latin or South America, which are covered under Pan American Health Organization, which is a sort of a variant of World Health Organization. Then there are middle income countries who self-procure all or most of the vaccines. So they just go by themselves. They don't have any third party or mediators in between them. And then the last bit is the high income countries, rich countries, Western developed countries, who actually procure these vaccines by themselves. So the process of vaccine procurement and pricing and access could very much depend on the mechanism by which you are going through. And as I said, if 40% of the basic sort of vaccines are going through, is going through UNICEF, but others we see some degree of support either from Gavi or from WHO. But then there is a large chunk of countries which are actually procuring these vaccines by themselves. And there is a spectrum of middle income and high income countries which are actually procuring these vaccines. So what could be the factors which could impact on access of vaccines and pricing? The countries that procure the vaccines directly from the supplier has complete autonomy over vaccine pricing, selection, and delivery process. Those countries were actually procuring vaccines from UNICEF and PAHO revolving fund. They also receive the benefits through large procurement pools because they have economies of scale, they get millions of doses, and then they also have the advantage to know the pricing structure, and they can actually negotiate prices with the pharmaceutical companies. Some of the factors which could affect in building a pricing strategy, and this is coming from a pharmaceutical industry point of view, how they would build a pricing strategy, and this is basically on the population analysis, mapping of potential competitors, constructing a vaccine target product profile, demand curve, price demand curve, and also looking at vaccines cost, which could be manufacturing, distribution, research and development, and so on and so forth. But one question which is very real, and this is, all sorts of vaccines, whether they are COVID-19 vaccines or other sort of vaccines, that the prices which are being published in the newspapers or in articles or in journal scientific articles or in scientific literature, whether these vaccine prices are real or not. So recently, manufacturers have started to publicize the criteria used in the pricing process, but this is a question because of the confidential rebates which pharmaceutical companies give to either governments or to providers. And then, of course, there are non-disclosure agreements with the buyers and the government. So through these disclosure agreements, you are bound not to disclose your real prices with the rest of the governments or made them public. So there are these are some of the issues which are not only on to the prices, but also with the general medicines as well. And then there is a tiered pricing for countries. So tiered pricing is basically differential pricing. And it's a concept which is largely used by big pharma. And this is the ability of the country to pay. So they will actually, the countries would pay according to their ability or their GDP. So basically the product would be priced differently in each market. So this is something like airline tickets, basically. So to look at the situation, recently we conducted a systematic review of literature on vaccine prices. And we published it in a journal called Vaccines just very recently, about a month ago. And this paper is basically what it does, that it actually looked at the primary literature, the original research which is published on vaccine prices in the last 5 years, and see what is happening in this market. So it's very interesting to see what were some of the important findings or results coming from this. So as I said, this systematic review summarizes recent original research on the topic of vaccine pricing, and this was done by screening thousands and hundreds of articles. So what we found that most original research articles related to price changes in childhood vaccines and HPV vaccines, which is human papillomavirus vaccine. It was observed that recently introduced vaccines were expensive, obviously, due to the new and better technologies, and also because of the research, development, and production. We also observed that affordable vaccine prices were found through the involvement of third parties, such as WHO, UNICEF, and procurement of vaccine through tender procedures. So the tender process seems to be sort of more cost-effective option for countries to get vaccines. And I'm going to present a bit of studies, what we found in this literature review. So what we observed, there were a number of studies. So for example, these two studies, they were talking about, for example, the first study was talking about childhood vaccines. So what it was saying, that recently introduced vaccines have high prices, competition in the supply side of the market. And then there was another study which was all conducted in mainland China to look at vaccines and immunization in China and report history, immunization policies, supply and prices of vaccines in comparison with other high and middle income countries. So what was observed that in China, the vaccines which are sort of more older vaccines, they're called category 1, where the newer vaccines are called category 2 vaccines. So what they observed were that the category 1 vaccines were very similar with the UNICEF prices, but lower than United States and European prices in China. Whereas the prices of domestically produced category 2 prices were lower than similar vaccines in the Europe, US and UNICEF. But in some cases, prices were higher than similar vaccines in the Europe and US. So this was very interesting that because in China, you would consider that the prices of many vaccines would be lower than United States and China, United States and Europe. But obviously this was not the case. So the prices of many vaccines were lower, but then there were some in which it was observed opposite. So this is the same thing again. The prices of category 1 vaccines were lower in many high-income countries, but then they were also related to the demands. The high prices of category 2 were related to the demands, economies of scale, and so on and so forth. And one of the arguments which was used by the Chinese manufacturer were that category 2 vaccines profit from the high prices, and this would also provide the manufacturers with an incentive to stay in the market and actually reinvest these profits to produce newer vaccines. Another important finding, which was coming from this systematic review of literature, was the prices of HPV vaccines. So it was interesting to look at what was happening in this scenario. So there were two studies which we found. The one was actually to look at 6 alternative scenarios on the distribution of benefits obtained from HPV vaccines. And this was found that economic returns for European companies or US companies were very high. So the high income country earned the greatest economic benefits by selling HPV vaccines. There was another to look at by Country et al. In 2019 to analyze tender procedure for the HPV vaccines in Europe and to identify variables that are associated with HPV vaccine prices in the tender-based settings. And it was observed that the tender-based prices, there were 4-time declines in vaccine compared to the other categories. So for example, if you look at, for example, decline in the prices, so you can see in this slide that from 2010, it was USD $32, which was actually sort of decreased to $13 in 2013, and then to $8 in 2015. So there was a gradual reduction in this. Gradual reduction of USD $122 and actually going down to USD 34 in 2017. So we see a gradual reduction of even HPV vaccine prices as well. So there are some facts, just recapping on this, that there are some facts on vaccine prices reduced when a product by a large number of suppliers in the market. There's a high prices when there's a patent protection, and you know that patent protection is very obvious for many countries. We are actually signatory to TRIPS and WTO, World Trade Organizations. So of course you see the higher prices when there's a patent protection. In high-income countries, the maximum price for a vaccine is almost 30 times higher than a lower-income country. So this is very interesting because often we see that we say a lot about low-income countries, the high prices in low-income countries, but the differential is about 30 times. So in middle-income countries, which are not supported by Gavi, the maximum price of a vaccine is 14 times higher than a low-income country. So which is again a price differential. Other factors which can impact on countries' income, quantity of purchased vaccines, purchase methods, duration of contract, and so on and so forth. But still we found that older vaccines are lower priced, but still some vaccines are quite expensive. For example, pertussis vaccines or tetanus whole cell pertussis or diphtheria vaccines, DTaP. So these prices, I mean, the prices of these vaccines are still very high. So somebody needs to investigate what are the reasons for high prices of these vaccines. So this was kind of a general overview of the vaccine prices. And the reason I've shown you this systematic review, because it's just a recent published research on the topic covering what is happening in regards to vaccine access and pricing in this area. And there are very few studies, the 4 studies which I've shown you, there are very few studies actually looking at access and vaccine pricing in the literature. This is what we observed, and mostly related to childhood vaccines, China, or HPV vaccines. So there's not much work in this category. And now coming back to the COVID-19 vaccine prices, and what do we know at this stage about this category? So there is a vaccine initiative, and 189 countries in the world have signed on this. And out of these 189, there are 92 low and middle income countries to actually promote access to affordable COVID-19 vaccines. At the moment, you know that many Western developed countries have bought doses of different sort of COVID-19 vaccines, but they only cover 20% of the global population. So the rest 80% is still not covered. And there are, of course, issues if other developing countries would like to manufacture, then of course there are issues with intellectual property rights and patents, unless or until some countries allow to use the Doha Declaration, TRIPS flexibilities and so on and so forth. One important question we have, and I found this very interesting to look at when you're pricing the COVID-19, that how much of this is being funded by the governments, actually, because we know these, and I found this very interesting. And if you look at this, you would see that for this Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine, majority of this is funded by the government. Okay, and also the Moderna vaccine is also funded by the government. Pfizer, BioNTech, again, 2/3 of this is funded by the government. Sanofi vaccine is not funded by the government, it's mostly from private. So you can see a substantial share of current COVID-19 vaccines, the funding is coming from the government, actually, to develop. And this is very obvious because for obvious reason, the government would like to support these initiatives. And these are the vaccine prices we see currently, which is published, coming from the published literature, and very similar for the BioNTech Pfizer vaccine. So in Europe, it's about 15 euros, which is about $18. In United States, it's about 19. So it's slightly lower in Europe as compared to United States. And this is, again, you can see that the Moderna is at the top with the $37 and followed by Pfizer and BioNTech 19. And then we have Oxford AstraZeneca, which is coming into more sort of lower end category, about $8 in this. And these are some of the other prices which I've seen, because this was, again, by the Belgium Secretary of State, because I saw this in the news. They actually sort of shared this on the media. So you can see again, these are on the lower side. Oxford AstraZeneca is on the lower side, whereas the Moderna is the most expensive, and BioNTech with. So you can see the different sort of pricing structures here. So you don't have sort of fixed prices, which is very obvious, and this goes hand in hand with the other drugs as well. So we can clearly see that the governments are negotiating the deals with them, because the price range from Moderna is from 37 to 18, or even lower than that. So anywhere between that. And this is how many doses been procured or pre-ordered by the different countries. And this situation is very fluid. This is changing very fast. So you can see that at the top, we could see Oxford AstraZeneca, where about 3 billion doses are being ordered by the different governments. And then about Pfizer, BioNTech, about $1.28 billion, where some other vaccines are on the play as well, which are coming to the market. So this is what we know. But as you know, as scientists, that a large number of vaccines are actually currently in under development, which we don't know. So my concluding remarks with this be that the published prices may not be the real prices. And this is again documented because of the variation I've shown you from the public sources, that even for Moderna vaccines, it could be 37 to 18 or even lower than that, anywhere in between. There is a differential pricing coming into play depending on the country's ability. Countries' current policies on access to medicines may have little impact on procurement pricing, because it's a current pandemic situation, it's an emergency situation. So it's basically countries' negotiation ability that where they would go and procure it. What we need at this stage is we need transparency in the pricing data for COVID-19 vaccines, because then the countries can make informed decisions for now and in the future. And we see that the situation is fluid because of the variations coming in, and it may continue in the future for a while. So with this, I would like to conclude here. Thank you so much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Babar. Thank you very much for your enlightening presentation. The first question is that the cost of logistics for vaccine, especially Pfizer vaccine, which requires minus 45 degrees centigrade for storage, the logistic cost would be significant for the retailers and for the companies which will manage its supply chain. Dr. Babar.
Yeah, sorry. So your question is that the cost which are, with the procurement and of course, that would play a role. And that's why you could see that in the pricing structure as well. So you would see that the Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna vaccines are more expensive as compared to the other vaccines, for example, AstraZeneca and others. But I don't know up to what extent that would play a role, because I'm sure that you would understand that very well as well, that it's basically the company's ability to negotiate at this stage. And the AstraZeneca and Oxford vaccine is on the cheaper end, because there's a lot of government investment. You would see huge amount of government investment as compared to Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna, where there is a government investment, but I see a lot more government investment on that side. So if you look at that, it's easier to handle. Then of course that could be more expensive, but it's actually cheaper. So how would we explain that? Because if it is easier to handle.
The problem in Pakistan, for example, there are so many the supply chain, the particularly cold supply chain is not very positive, not very effective, not very consolidated. So if we have to, the retailer or the wholesaler or the distributor has to keep the vaccine at minus 45 degrees centigrade, it will cost. It will cost. And that cost is not the cost of the vaccine. It will be additional cost. It is the cost which the distributor or the retailer or the supplier will pay.
Yeah.
So what would be the situation in this way?
I think in that case, again, I would say that this is not a usual scenario we have, because it's again a high level negotiation the countries are doing with the companies. So this is not a normal situation where you are actually going for and negotiating with the drug company. So I think the best possible option is to negotiate with as many companies as you can. And of course, AstraZeneca seems to be the choice because you can have it at a normal fridge temperature or something like that. So that could be, but I wouldn't rule out negotiating with the other companies, because one of the point we have is basically is the, of course we see the effectiveness of these vaccines, but this is going to be more clear in the future. AstraZeneca and Oxford vaccine seems to be the choice, but my opinion that the government needs to negotiate and open up the communication with as many pharmaceutical companies as it could do at this stage. Open up the communication and have a discussion and negotiation, regardless of, I mean, I totally agree with you that even if you have Pfizer vaccine, and if you don't have a supply chain which could deliver it, then what's the point? So having said that, looking at the effectiveness, safety, and profile of all these vaccines, I think it's imperative for the governments to actually open the negotiation. And this is what is happening all across the globe.
Apart from logistics, what are the other factors which could impact the price of vaccines?
I think apart from the logistic, it's the economies of scale. I mean, if you look at from Pakistan point of view, Pakistan is in a position because it's a fifth or sixth populous country in the world with over 200 million people. So I think economies of scale is a big thing here, which can play an important role when you negotiate with these doses with the drug companies. This not only provides them the opportunity to actually you can get it maybe at a reduced prices because of the economies of scale. So we're not talking about a million population. We're talking about 200 million people here. So that not only provide the economies of scale, but also the clinical data which comes together with it. Because everyone who would be interested to know that what is the real impact of these vaccines on the human population, because this is not, at this stage, we don't know yet. We see that this week only, yesterday, the Oxford AstraZeneca, vaccine is first time given to a person. So we don't know the large scale effect or impact or benefit or safety or effectiveness profile of these vaccines so far. So the Pakistan provides them the opportunity, not only in terms of providing revenues, but also the clinical data which comes together with it, actually. So I think these are the important points. And if even not big studies, maybe some small scale studies with few thousand people could really give some good data to pharmaceutical companies in this context. So my sort of 2-cent opinion here is to go for all companies and actually negotiate on the basis of economies of scale. And at this stage, it's a very sort of we have few pharmaceutical companies that everybody is talking to them. So it's not going to be a easy thing. Of course, everyone knows that it's quite challenging, but it is what it is. Yeah.
Suggest that the Pakistani companies should negotiate with the companies for bringing the bulk of the vaccine and put them in local small doses in Pakistan in finished form. The vaccine to be imported in finished form, and the doses will be made locally. Bulk manufacturing.
Yeah, I think that could be done, but this is a question for the pharmaceutical scientists to basically see what is the feasibility and applicability of doing that, whether up to what extent it's feasible with this temperature and all that. So there are some technicalities here which I think only more technical people who handle vaccines could answer those questions. But there is no harm in pharmaceutical companies actually talking to these. And in the past, I must say, Pakistani pharmaceutical companies have set some good examples, like in the case of hepatitis C, hepatitis C interferon, which were very expensive. Even in the United States, people can't afford it. But in Pakistan and Egypt, the pharmaceutical companies actually imported this and provided people at lower prices to the population, very affordable prices. So I think in Pakistan, there are some good examples by pharmaceutical industry to improve access to affordable medicines. This has been done in the past by Pakistani pharmaceutical companies, and I don't really see a point that why not now that pharmaceutical companies can actually go and negotiate. But I think pharmaceutical companies is one thing, but the governments needs to step up as well, because when the governments go to big pharma, they would listen them more. This is my understanding. I'm not saying that they wouldn't listen to private providers. Of course they would. But this is more sort of a strategic issue now, because you have very, you have fixed quantity of doses and you have so many buyers.
What is the futuristic scenario related to access and pricing of COVID vaccine? If you would like to add more about.
Yeah, I think it's too early to say anything on that. It's very complicated, and especially when we see that there are conflicting reports coming up. Just yesterday, we heard that there is a new variant in South Africa of corona, where there's a new variation in which the traditional vaccine is not working. So I think anything which is related to access and pricing debate, it is very much linked with the safety and effectiveness of vaccines. If they are safe and effective in the future, if it is going to be proven useful in the future after it has been given to millions of people, then of course the demand of these vaccines would increase. And so is the complexity involved with it. But if we see if there will be sort of issues with these vaccines, then of course you come up with the development of new models and new variations of these vaccines. And again, there will be challenges to that. So I see the challenges in both ways in a futuristic scenario, but definitely this is something which is I think in the near future, a year or two or even more, it's going to stay here, and the countries have to deal with it.
There are certain problems people are thinking or anticipating with their vaccines. They have fear about the adverse drug effect of vaccines, and there are also fear about some genetic changes which the vaccine could impart on the person who gets the vaccine.
I think I wouldn't worry too much about it at this stage, because even in UK alone, there are about, I think, 500,000 people at this stage which are being given vaccines. So I wouldn't so much worry about it, because I think at this stage, of course, we are looking at more of course, we are concerned with the safety. And this is an important issue, because the more data would available, the more people would get a build of a confidence. But I think more at the moment, a large number of people are being vaccinated, and of course there are maybe fewer side effects. But I wouldn't worry too much about this aspect at this.
Not only the side effects, people are worried about the genetic changes which people are anticipating after.
I'm not aware of anything like that.
Okay.
That would result in any.
There's a question from
Dr. Zaheer. I have a question, not related to pricing, but I just read one data today that it will take a huge amount of time to vaccinate even a country like UK.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't recall the number, but if you have like in a week, you will have only 25,000 people to vaccinate, and then again you need after 3 weeks you need to have a second dose. So do you have any idea how long it will take, for example, to vaccinate the UK citizens, and then we are talking about a global population.
I mean,
Because the data it looked horrible. It will
yeah.
take maybe years and years to vaccinate the entire globe.
Yeah, I mean, the countries like UK, we just last night we had another lockdown in the UK. So I don't think so it's going to take years. It may take few months to actually vaccinate. And at the moment, as I said, the vaccination campaign started 2 to 3 weeks ago. So there are 500,000 people, I mean, more than 600,000, if I'm not correct, the figures. So I think the vaccination campaign at this stage, it's in the full drive, and this is going to go up. So the more organized countries will do it more quickly, because even they are involving pharmacies to vaccinate, they're involving other healthcare professionals, GP practices, hospitals, all kind of things to vaccinate people. The smaller countries will be able to do much sooner and faster with organized structure, such as New Zealand, for example, 4 million people. But then again, there are countries which don't have access to vaccines. Either it's because of the prices they have, or because the country's ability, or because of logistics. Of course, this is going to be much more challenging, and it may take years. But I think countries like UK would be, in my opinion, it's going to take a few months, if not weeks.
I can also answer your question. So it will, 66 million population of UK. That is the statistics. And what happens that if every day on a daily basis they have 55,000 new cases on a daily basis, so you are anyways looking at 60% of the population also being, naturally having herd immunity by 7 months. And in the meantime, if they start the vaccination program, so 30 to 40% of the population will be vaccinated. So I think you are anyways achieving your target.
I'm not a herd immunity expert, neither I'm an immunologist. So I think I will leave this to the people who are expert in the field to decide and go about it. What I can talk about is in terms of accessibility, and how this is going to play in the future. But I'm sure the government is working towards it. And I think every country, if you look at around the globe, they have a plan, and the countries more and more countries are negotiating with drug companies that how to procure the supply, and they get these vaccines on board. So there is a chart, actually, if somebody's interested, I can send, which actually shows that how much countries, what is the population of a country which is being vaccinated. So you can see every day the numbers are going up. So regardless of what countries think about it, what people think about it, what we see at this stage is a momentum of getting vaccinated, and more and more countries are joining, and more people around the globe are being vaccinated.
The last day, any suggestion or any advice for the government of Pakistan?
Before you answer, I would just comment that unfortunately that in Pakistan and India both are almost separated from British Empire.
Yeah.
But for India developed their vaccine production, but Pakistan could not. You have been involved various regularly in the past with the government of Pakistan. What do you think that what is the reason that Pakistan could not develop vaccine production in Pakistan?
I think I guess many thanks for this question, and I think it's a very interesting question given the fact. But India's ability to produce vaccine is not only vaccines; it's also with the raw material, and it's also its ability to produce many other medicines as well. Because I believe that India is the powerhouse. Even many other developing nations, like antiretroviral medicines and any other medicines which are produced in India. So it's India's manufacturing base the chemical industries and all other industries, which makes it very interesting to produce. So that could come together with the vaccine workforce. But then there are other countries, for example, Cuba or Brazil, who have actually developed quite innovative capability to manufacturing. So having said that, of course, we are appreciative of India's effort to produce. But having said that, I mean, there's no reason why Pakistan cannot do it. But this requires a large scale, if I'm not mistaken, not only the manufacturing base, but also investment in terms of high-tech industry. And I remember because earlier this year, last year, I was appointed as an advisor to Pakistan's national medicines policy by Dr. Zafar. And we actually put in something to support pharmaceutical industry in Pakistan. And in the national medicines policy draft, we put in to support high-tech pharmaceutical industry in Pakistan as well. So these are some parts and features of this. And I think this should go in. And any government comes in, I think they need to think about this to develop the local capability as well as the high-tech capability of the industry as well. But and especially this is quite important in the low and middle income countries context.
But considering our special relationship with China, where they have developed vaccines, I mean, probably they have already developed vaccine because they have started vaccinating about 3-4 months back, earlier than any vaccine came really into the market. Our government, because we have contact at the places where probably we don't have, not even our association, that can you don't ask you to the government or regulator, they can contact China and develop facility, because NIH had the facility previously, but then you know what has happened to NIH, and now Dow University of Health Sciences has also developed a facility. But these kind of facilities can develop in Pakistan, high-tech. I mean, there are scientists working in the university. Your friend in all over Pakistan, you know, everybody that who could do that, they are able people. But unfortunately, putting all those together and coming up with, because now these kind of viruses and diseases will crop up because of the environmental issue. We know this environment, bad environment, I would say, is creating a lot of other diseases which in future we might face. So I mean, having with this seminar or webinar, probably we would like to raise our voice that the regulator should put act together to have capability developed in Pakistan also.
Absolutely, Kassab. I think you have raised very important points on this, and of course, with the Chinese and together with the China, with the strengthening relationship in the scientific field, this can be done. But I would say, I mean, not only dependence on a country, but actually sort of a multi-option, not only with China, but with other countries as well. So you could have technology coming from, you know, all parts of the world, and then perhaps coming to a stage where something indigenous could be developed. But of course, the points you have raised are worthy, and these could be, you know, go further in this context.
Thank you very much, Professor Zaheer-Ud-Din Babar Sahab. And I request Dr. Mavish Khan for a word of thanks.
Dr. Mavish is our zonal chairman of Pakistan Pharmaceutical Association. The first lady who could become chairperson of association.
Thank you, Dr. Mavish. Nice meeting you here.
Nice meeting you, Dr. Babar, Zaheer-Ud-Din Babar, and thank you. This session was very informative, and I hope that we are able to get a vaccine soon and it starts rolling out in our society, because it is a need. Probably, I feel that in Pakistan, the numbers that are being shown every day, the problem of COVID is much more than what is being depicted over here. And I hope that we start off soon with some kind of program But this was extremely informative, and I think we need to collectively think about it, how to procure vaccines over here, and give it at a subsidized rate to the communities and to people who need it the most, and start soon. But thank you very much for this session.
Absolutely, I agree with you, Dr. Mavish, and thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to actually share my thoughts, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you to Pakistan Pharmaceutical Manufacturer Association for giving me the opportunity to speak on this issue. I'm very grateful.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank you.
all participants. Thank you very much.